Dividing complex numbers. So you guys have already learned that a complex number is when you have something like a plus bi. First, I'm going to teach you about conjugates. So, the conjugate of a plus bi is a minus bi. So these two parts are conjugates of each other. This is important because a plus bi times a minus bi gives you a squared minus b squared I squared. And because I squared is -1, this equals a squared plus b squared. So you've gotten rid of your i's. Let's do some more examples of conjugates. So if we have 2 plus 4i, what's the conjugate? 2 minus 4i. If we have 1 minus I, then what's the conjugate? It's the opposite sign in the middle, so 1 plus I is the conjugate. How about -3 plus 4i? The conjugate of that would be -3 minus 4i. What about -2 minus 2i? The conjugate of that would be -2 plus 2i. So, the conjugate is really just changing this sign in between a and b, from a positive to a negative, or a negative to a positive. Plus or minus, either way. Example 1. 2 divided by 1 plus I. So just like we can't leave a radical in the denominator of a fraction, we can't leave an imaginary number in the denominator of a fraction. So we'll multiply both the top and bottom by the conjugate. So in this case, the conjugate is 1 minus I. So we multiply the top by 1 minus I and the bottom by 1 minus I. When we do this, we get 2 times 1 minus I over 1 plus I times 1 minus I. On the top, we can distribute the 2 so that we get 2 minus 2i, and then on the bottom we'll FOIL so that we get 1 minus I squared. And we know that I squared really equals -1, so that goes to 2 minus 2i over 1 minus -1. Then we simplify that even further to 2 minus 2i over 1 minus -1, which is the same thing as 1 plus 1, which is 2. And then we can divide this whole thing by 2, so if we can cross out all the 2's, our final answer is 1 minus I. Example number 2. 4 divided by -2i. So what's the conjugate of -2i? Well, you can think of it as 0 minus 2i. So the conjugate of that would be 0 plus 2i. So the conjugate of -2i is +2i. So we'll multiply the top and the bottom by 2i. When we do this, we get 4 times 2i on the top gives us 8i, and on the bottom, negative 2i times 2i gives us negative 4i squared. And since we know that I squared is equal to negative 1, we can make this 8i over positive 4, because negative 4 times negative 1 equals positive 4. And when we divide 8 by 4, we get 2. So our final answer is 2i. Example number 3. 2 plus I divided by 3i. Now, even though there's a complex number in the top and the bottom, we're only going to divide or use the complex number from the bottom to find the conjugate, because you're allowed to have a complex number on the top, but we can't have one in the denominator. So we'll multiply both the top and the bottom by negative 3i, because negative 3i is the conjugate of positive 3i. So this goes to negative 3i times 2 plus I over 3i times negative 3i. So in the numerator, when we distribute negative 3i, we get negative 3i times 2 is negative 6i, and negative 3i times 1 is negative 3i squared. I meant to say times I there. Then in the denominator, 3i times negative 3i will give us negative 9i squared. So, because negative 1 equals I squared, we can simplify this to negative 6i plus 3 over positive 9. And when we divide each part of this fraction by 3, our final answer is negative 6i divided by 3 is negative 2i, plus 3 divided by 3 is 1, all over 9 divided by 3 is 3. And that is our final answer. Alright, last example, number 4. 2 plus I over 3 minus I. So this one's a little bit trickier because there's a complex number on the numerator and the denominator. But we're only going to multiply by the conjugate of the denominator. So, we're going to multiply the top and the bottom by 3 plus I, because 3 plus I is the conjugate of 3 minus I. So when we multiply, we get 2 plus I times 3 plus I over 3 minus I times 3 plus I. And when we FOIL the top, 3 times 2, 6, plus outer, so 2 times I is 2I, plus inner, 3 times I is 3I, and outer, I times I is I squared, over 3 times 3 is 9, outer, plus 3 times I, 3I, inner, so 3 times negative I is minus 3I, and last, minus I squared. And when we simplify this, we get 6 plus 5I plus I squared over 9 minus I squared. Now, when we simplify the I squareds into -1, we get 6 plus 5I minus 1 over 9 minus -1. So this gives us 6 minus 1 is 5 plus 5I over 9 minus -1 gives us 10. And when we divide this fraction, we can simplify it by dividing 5 from each part, so that our final answer is 1 plus I over 2. And that's it.